Redditors, what's the most unbelievable thing that has ever happened in the existence of mankind, and what makes it so hard to grasp the reality that the event occurred? Toba catastrophe theory, which says 75,000 years ago a volcano caused human population to drop to several thousand. We are all children of those survivors. When the British took Washington DC in the War of 1812, they burned the White House. The next day they were going to burn the House of Congress. The clouds began to swirl and the winds kicked up. A tornado formed in the center of the city and headed straight for the British on Capitol Hill. The twister ripped buildings from their foundations and trees up by the roots. British cannons were tossed around by the winds. Several British troops were killed by falling structures and flying debris. Tornadoes are exceptionally rare in DC. God bless America, I guess. Getting rid of smallpox forever. A disease that killed probably a billion people through history, gone forever through mass vaccination. Cue the idiot anti-vaxxers in 3, 2, 1. The moon is the exact diameter and the exact distance from the earth to appear exactly the same size as the sun. This gives us eclipses in which the moon perfectly covers the sun, no more, no less. As vast as the universe is, what are the odds of finding another planet where this is true? Also, since the Earth's distance to the moon and sun vary, sometimes they appear to be slightly different sizes, but only slightly. What's more is that because the moon is moving away from the Earth, there's only a narrow window of time, on geological astronomical scales, that this is true. The World Wide Web. It represents the pinnacle of human achievement for a variety of reasons, from how it was conceived to how it still works. And similar to the post about electricity, the internet is such a relatively recent invention that there are plenty of people alive who grew up without it. Heck, I'm 39 and I didn't get access to it until 6th form college. That guy who died for 14 minutes and then went on to win the jackpot on a scratch card twice. One of the times live on TV when he was recreating the moment he'd done it. Pretty sure that dude went to heck by mistake for a second there and God was just paying him back. A dude named Tsutomu Yamaguchi survives the Hiroshima bomb despite being very near ground zero, then already being heavily injured travels to Nagasaki and reports for work already being bandaged. Once again he survives despite being around 3 kilometers from ground zero, and then lives until 2009. Going to work after literally getting nuked is the most Japanese thing I've ever heard. That two of the authors of the Declaration of Independence, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, died on the exact same day, 4 hours apart, and that day was the 4th of July, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration. Didn't one of them say before they died at least the other one is alive? That some of the Native American Apache warriors who broke out with Geronimo and fought a guerrilla war against the US Army were still alive to see the US drop Castle Bravo, the most powerful nuke the US ever tested. Humanity almost went extinct 72,000 years ago due to the Mt. Toba eruption. Researchers estimate there were only 4,000 survivors in Africa. Ted Cruz jokes aside, the Zodiac killer still fascinates me. The fact that somebody was able to completely elude law enforcement to the point there are no leads to the killer's identity 50 years later is honestly amazing. Well, you never know what can happen. They recently caught the Iran's Golden State Killer, more than 30 years after the crimes. Yersinia pestis, more commonly known as the Black Death, killed something north of 75 million people in the mid-14th century. This was something like 1/4 and 1/2 of the entire human race at the time. Like all cataclysms, it disproportionately affected the poor, resulting in a famine in following years because there was no one to work the fields. Furthermore, the demand for labor meant that skilled peasants had more access to money and education for their kids. The worst pandemic in history directly led to the emergence of the middle class. The plague germ itself is still active in various parts of the world today, but it's easily treated with antibiotics. To me it has to be the fall of the Khwarezm Empire. The fact that the Mongols would destroy and kill every living creature if a city didn't surrender peacefully to Genghis Khan's army, in a time when they had no machine guns and every Mongol soldier was supposedly given a quota for how many lives they had to claim and filled sacks full of ears to confirm those kills. A lot of crazy stories from that conquest, like the one where one of the Khan's son-in-laws died during one of the sieges, and when the Mongols finally took it over, they ordered every citizen be brought to the town center to be beheaded in front of the Khan's daughter as revenge, while she overlooked every execution lamenting her fallen husband. Or the city where even the rats, dogs, and cats were all ordered to be slaughtered. Another really crazy story that I can remember had to be when a town heard of the Mongols coming. The citizens were divided between surrendering and fighting. When the Mongols got closer and tensions in the city were at their peak between the two parties, they fought amongst themselves, and the side that wanted to surrender won the struggle, and when they let the Mongols in, the leader of the army ordered the execution of everyone anyways, because you couldn't trust such men. Also, when the Mongols would finish destroying a town and move on to the next, they would often send a detachment back to the destroyed cities to kill any people who may have been hiding during the first attack and come upon them as they buried their relatives. While the Wild West era was going on, New York City had electric lights. It lasted something like 30 years only. I just find it insane that dinosaurs actually existed. I mean, a Tyrannosaurus Rex was 13 feet tall, 45 feet long, 9 tons, had banana-sized teeth and a bite force of 12,800 c, had some of the sharpest senses of any animal to ever live, better vision than an eagle, better sense of smell than almost any other animal, extremely acute hearing, and was packed with muscle from head to toe, even compared to other similarly sized theropods. Even its relatively small arms could each lift around 400 pounds. When you describe it like that, it doesn't even sound like a real animal. It sounds like a movie monster. And that thing actually existed. How about the fact that we now routinely travel farther in a year than our ancestors did in their entire lives, using ground vessels powered by explosions? Similar to how we can fly, we can now strap tanks of compressed air on our backs and tour the ocean floor as if we were fish. The fact that Christendom in the 1230s and Islam as a whole in the 1250s might have been saved all cause a Godari Khan and Monk Khan died of alcoholism. Whenever the Great Khan died, all Mongol nobility and generals stopped whatever the heck they were doing and went back to Mongolia to decide the new Khan. Can you imagine if these two didn't die of alcoholism? Can you imagine what a fully Mongol invaded Europe led by Subute Bachu would have done to European history? Or what the course of Islamic history would have looked like if the Mongol war machine of 1255 led by Hulagu had attacked Mamluk Egypt? World history as we know it might be because two Mongol Khans couldn't hold their fricking liquor, and that's just mind-boggling. Time to play Civ again. The invention of music. A universal system and language of something so simple yet that holds so much power. Music has some serious power, and it uses math like the rest of the universe, but affects us in a totally different way than most anything. I've been thinking about this a lot this past year for some reason. It's easy to be pessimistic about humans these days, but music is a pretty incredible product of the human brain. Imagination, collaboration, math. Everything it takes to generate music is a marvel, and then you get into how people are influenced by it. I mean, even the shittiest song possible is still kind of a miracle. The man who tried to assassinate Andrew Jackson had two different pistols jam. If there are alternate realities, we live in one that had a 1 in 100,000 chance of existing. Or the time when he challenged the best sharpshooter in the town to a duel, lets him shoot first, gets shot, shoots the man dead, and survives. That people blow tens if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on Scientology and are also okay with their children signing a billion-year contract with them. I guess not so much that there are people that do it, but the fact that there are so many brings to mind a great quote by George Carlin. Think of how stupid the average person is, and realize half of them are stupider than that. That the Mongolian civilization in the 13th century, armed only with horses, arrows, and steel, managed to sweep through and completely conquer the vast majority of the entire Eurasian landmass in only about 10 years. forming the largest contiguous land empire in history. There were over 12 million casualties, a record only surpassed 700 years later in World War II. They killed so many people that it altered worldwide climate. Not really an event, but the size of the universe itself. The speed of light is 300 million meters per second. That basically means light can go around the Earth 7 times every second. Now, imagine going at that speed in a straight line for a year. The distance traveled would be around 220 million times the circumference of the Earth. This is a light year. Now, that's already mind-boggling on its own, but that's not the end. Scientists estimate that the diameter of the observable universe is 93 billion light years. That's just the bit we can see. It's probably larger than that. Completely blows my mind every time. And there are places that, according to our current understanding of physics, we will never be able to visit, because the universe is expanding too fast to even reach them with 0.999 c. I think that humans invented forged metal. Like, how does that even happen? How do you, without knowing that metal is in ore, that ore is distinct from any old rock, and without knowing you can melt it, decide to stuff it in a hole, with coal or some other fuel, in such a way as to generate the heat to melt it, and then from there also make sure the metal pours out in a usable form? How do you make that series of decisions? It's always seemed so crazy to me. We figured out that turning billions of electronic switches on and off could create a relatively accurate representation of the universe. Like, go ahead, try explaining a personal computer of any capacity to someone from 80 years ago. Okay, so, if you're curious, go to YouTube and look up how a computer processor works. I've tried to make sense of it, but I've come to the conclusion that it's powered by black magic. There's no other explanation. Crap, limited to mankind only, huh? While I think getting to the moon is a huge accomplishment, I'd like to give a shout out to electricity. Like, we harness this naturally occurring phenomenon to light the darkness, create new revolutionary forms of entertainment, art, communications, and the spread of information. Humanity is old as frick, but we have had electricity for a blink of an eye compared to that. If we don't blow ourselves to heck soon, I think we can bring a new age we've never seen before. Like 4 generations ago, give or take, didn't have any of the electricity or electricity driven technology we have today. My grandfather, in his 80s now, probably knew a handful of old folks who didn't have it. Like, that kind of old world lifestyle is within second-hand accounts. It's pretty wild. Yeah, it's crazy, but even in rural parts of the US 50 years ago they didn't have electricity. My dad grew up just outside a small town in Alaska without electricity or running water, and he's just 50. Okay, this may seem like a joke, but I think about this every year or so. The amount of people that had to frick each other so we could be here. Can you imagine? Yeah, remember through Egypt times with pharaohs and crap? You had family somewhere in those times. World War I? Family. Renaissance? Family. Castles and kings and shoots? Family. Remember cave people? Yeah, they fricked each other for you to be here. Imagine the amount of combinations that happened so you could be here. Imagine all the times where people almost never fricked. Imagine all the times that someone fricked other person first before setting up with your Greek's 10,000 grandfather. It blows my mind. The thousands and thousands of years that people had to end up having a baby together so you could be here. I wonder how many of us are related now. It's amazing to me. Wish the animus was real, honestly. Mate, you don't know the half of it. You are a part of a 4 billion year old, unbroken chain of life, starting from the first microbial life forms into the modern era. Screens. How the heck did people build a little flat piece of glass that projects stuff? And on top of that, making touch screens. It's just so bizarre. Plus put little holes in them so the breeze could pass through but annoying insects couldn't. The internet. What is the internet? I honestly could not explain how it was created and how it works. But even further, due to said technology, I have seen more naked women than all of my previous ancestors combined. Flat rocks full of lightning talk to each other over telegraph at very high speeds. That's the internet. The Tunguska event. An asteroid explodes over a remote area in Russia and is considered the largest impact event on Earth. Yet there was no crater, just leveled trees, yet no one died, at least that we know of. What makes it unbelievable is that it had x1000 the power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, and could have caused extinction if it hit, but it didn't. It just blew up in the sky and leveled part of a forest. Not something that has happened yet, but the fact that mankind has the ability to cause a mass extinction event affecting the entire planet in just a moment's notice by splitting a few atoms. NX10 circumflex 25 atoms approx. FTFY. The start of World War I. A group of Serbian kids, called the Black Hand, were that their country was a colony of Austria. To state it very simply, they'd decide to kill the heir to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a mega power, controlling a huge chunk of Europe. His name was Franz Ferdinand. Dude's in town, essentially as a PR stunt, and he's doing this JFK-style motorcade parade. They'd decide to kill him with one of those Mario-style bombs, you know the type, the big round ones with a long fuse. The attack was in part organized by a young man named Gavrilo Princip. The plan was organized so that a handful of bombers would line the street and take their chances. For whatever reason, the caravan missed the first bombers completely. The next one washed out completely. As the caravan approaches the final bomber, he decides that it's now or never and go time. He springs out of the crowd and lobs the bomb at the convertible. It misses barely and deflects off the side panel, back into the crowd, killing bystanders and the bomber himself. The caravan speeds off, and the attempt is a bust. Dejected, our young anti-hero, Gavrilo, hastily exits and settles at a cafe. He orders a coffee and tries to act natural. Back to our speeding caravan, Franz Ferdinand tells everybody, hey, we can spin this into some good PR. We need to go support these innocents who are hurt from this bomb. He tells the driver to take him and his wife to the hospital. The driver agrees but tells Franz that it is the opposite direction. They pull down a side street that is dead-ended. The driver begins to make a U-turn. Ironically, at the end of the street is the cafe, with Gavrilo sitting, open-jawed, at his target making a 5-point turn in a back alley. He jumps up and unloads his gun into the car, killing the prince and his wife. Within weeks, all of Europe is at war. Within months, most of the world is. And by the end as many as 21 million human lives had been lost due to this moment in history. If some time traveler were able to appear to Princip in that moment and tell him that the next 60 seconds would determine the fate of tens of millions, I wonder if that would change everything, or if he would still do it. Either way, it feels like a Tarantino movie, or the plot of Final Destination. The weird, hairpin turns in a couple people's lives could shape the next century of history. Without World War I you don't have WW2. Without World War II you don't have the Cold War. Without the Cold War, you don't have modern politics, and without all that, you don't have nukes, 9/11, ISIS. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand started World War I. But if he hadn't been killed it would have happened anyways. All of the major players wanted this war, and it had been planned for over a decade when it finally kicked off. This was not some half-cocked impulsive decision that got out of hand. They were all ready to roll the dice one last time to see who really ruled Europe. The sheer amount of people killed by the Black Plague. Imagine how society would shift if a plague today killed off anywhere near that percentage of the population. Scientifically, how they theorize life on Earth was formed. Currently, the most plausible theory is that billions of years of superstorms eventually unintentionally electrified atoms into perpetuating molecules aka cells, thus beginning life on Earth. As you can imagine, this event even in the time span given would be like winning the lottery and then some. An astronomically unlikely event, but one necessary to start everything we know as life on this planet. If you play the lottery every day for several billion years you eventually have to win. George Washington peacefully transferring power was almost unprecedented. King George literally called him the greatest man in the world for rescinding power. If your biggest enemy in the world calls you the greatest man for your actions, you deserve it. On Friday, the 3rd of August in the year 2018, millions of people believe that the Earth is flat and the moon is a projection. What's up, moon truthers? The thing about 1 in 6 people is related to Genghis Khan. He is the only person that, if he was still alive today, can say to almost anyone that he fucked her mom over the internet. What's more interesting is that we throw that statistic around despite the fact we have never actually found Genghis Khan and or his grave. Given the pickup line my dad supposedly used, my birth, the existence of paper currency, we somehow managed to make most of the people on the planet think that something has a certain worth, just because someone said so. You could say the same thing about gold. I find it absolutely unbelievable that the Spanish flu isn't talked about more. The disease is a modern day example of the plague game. The disease at its peak infected up to 500 million people worldwide, roughly 25-33% of the world's population. Every 1/4 1/3 of people were infected, and killed 50-100 million people, all within 2 years, most of which happened in the 1918. All of a sudden though, the disease dissipated by sheer luck, and mutated into a less virulent strain because those infected by the more virulent strain had already died off. I can't even imagine what would happen if a disease like that had spread today. It's completely nutty that we don't talk about this brief episode in history. I don't remember being taught about this in any of my history class. Then again, we kind of stopped leading up to modern history like the Vietnam War etc. I honestly only looked back on it recently because there was a Bill Gates interview talking about what he feared most in his lifetime and spoke about infectious disease and antibiotic resistance over nuclear warfare. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.